motivation. I am the storm that is approaching.
So here's the thing. I think I've established myself pretty solidly as an avid Mortal Kombat fan at this point. I've been a fan since I was a kid, and I've loved watching the series evolve as I've grown up. I made a video about my favorite character, I've made a video fan casting for the movies, but I've never really talked about the games themselves, which is weird when you think about it. So what better place to start than with Mortal Kombat's new beginning? So, based on the 2-ish weeks of playing, here are my thoughts on Mortal Kombat 1. I want to highlight the story first because I think this is where the majority of my issues lie. But massive spoilers, by the way. In case it wasn't obvious, I'm going to talk about some pretty important plot elements from Mortal Kombat 1, so just click off the video and come back once you've played it. I think MK1's story is kinda good until the final act. I know everybody really hates the chapter system that NetherRealm uses to structure their story modes, but I've always liked the format and think they did it pretty well this time. It's not like MK9 where only half the roster gets covered, it's a 23 character roster stacked against a 15 chapter story, which includes the fact that you can pick your own fighter for the final chapter. I also think they did a pretty good job balancing when and how you get loot, since you mostly get gear for the opponent you defeat rather than the character you play as. It ensures that even though characters like Nitara and Havik don't get chapters, you still get stuff for them as you progress. And I thought the plot itself was pretty clever for the most part. Starting with the tournament to ease in new and old players alike, and turning into a mystery about Shang Tsung and Kronika's plans was really great. I also love the highlight for characters that don't usually get a lot of plot relevance, like Reptile and Baraka. My problem comes from the overabundance of multiverse shit in the final act, and the rushing of plot elements that I felt should have been saved for the sequel. Specifically, I don't like the way this game retells its story. As I played, I began to realize that this game is effectively doing for the 3D trilogy what Mortal Kombat 9 did for the original trilogy. Where MK9 was a remixing of the plots of Mortal Kombat, MK2, and MK3, Mortal Kombat 1 lifts elements from the 3D trilogy, that being Deadly Alliance, Deception, and Armageddon. And while I like it in concept, I feel it was incredibly rushed and mishandled. MK9's story worked because it took the time to retell those stories over the course of each act, and remixed actual plot points from them to keep a narrative structure. MK1 chooses only to take the aesthetics of these stories, specific details like the pairing of Shang Tsung and Quan Chi as well as the Stone Army from Deadly Alliance, the minor detail of Titan Shang Tsung's fake persona being called Damashi from Deception, and out of fucking nowhere, the Pyramid from Armageddon. It also has to tack on being a reintroduction to Mortal Kombat, and I feel like that doesn't really work. I've been a fan of this franchise since I was little, so I understood what was going on, but my editor Martha, who has only started getting into Mortal Kombat because we met while I was working on the old fancast video, was confused as fuck by Titan Shang Tsung and his reveal. Again, I defer to MK9. Don't get me wrong, that story has problems, but if it's your introduction to the Mortal Kombat lore, you'll walk away with a pretty decent understanding of all the major players without having played the prior 7 games. The fact that it ties into Armageddon's ending is almost ancillary, as all it does is fuel Raiden's actions, so it really could have been anything. This game's entire final act hinges on you as a player knowing what happened at the end of MK11's story DLC, which shouldn't be the case. This does feel like a bit of a mistitle, as it isn't a fresh start for Mortal Kombat, just the next chapter in the story. So, at the end of the day, while I like a lot of the new and returning characterization, and while I think the story is cohesive from a purely structural standpoint, I think Mortal Kombat 1's story is pulled too thin. It's torn between doing its own thing, retelling the story of the 3D trilogy, rebooting the Mortal Kombat franchise, continuing the story of 11, and expanding on the Mortal Kombat multiverse. Speaking of which, I know I touched on it briefly, but yeah, I wasn't too big a fan of MK1's heavy focus on multiverse stuff near the end, primarily because I feel like we need to be introduced to this new timeline properly before we start smashing it into the other ones. But, to throw the story a bone, I will add that this scene genuinely brought a tear to my eye, especially since I've been feeling it a little bit recently in a weird way.
If many timelines sprung from one, and we were both part of it, then you are my Liu Kang.
The same one who battled you in Shang Tsung's courtyard, who fought at your side at the Colosseum, who beamed with pride when you became Outworld's Khan.
Why does fate seem always to conspire against us? To deny us life's simple pleasures?
I don't know. Perhaps in one of the many timelines, they are ours.
Okay, time for nice things before I go back to bitching. This game's combat is absolutely perfect. I've always been of the mindset that MK9 was the perfect speed for combat, and MKX went overboard and made everything too fast, and then MK11 went way too hard in the other direction and made it too slow. MK1 feels like we've gone back to 9, with an appropriate amount of speed and impact in every punch. I also think there are really interesting new gameplay features in MK1 that make certain characters stand out, like Johnny's star power meter, Kenshi's Virgil devil trigger thing, and Shang Tsung's ability to switch between his young and old forms for new combos. Learning all these new techniques will make certain characters harder to master than your typical MK fighter, and it's a really nice change of pace, but there's still the majority of the roster going with a more traditional combat design. And I really like the reintroduction of proper air combos, since I'm the kind of fucker who sucks at taking advantage of his pop-ups usually, and now I feel like I stand a decent chance with that. I haven't had time to explore every single character, but I've dabbled in most of the roster, and I've found that most characters are easy to pick up with an incredibly high skill ceiling. So I'd say if your only goal is to pick up and play, then this game succeeds at that. And the cameos add a surprisingly satisfying layer of depth to the game's already great combat. I read somewhere that part of Ed Boon's goal with cameos was for the fan discussion to not only be who's the best fighter, but then to extend it into what's the best fighter and cameo combo. And I feel like they really succeeded with that. It's really good stuff. And, you know, not that my opinion means anything, but in terms of my favorite fighter cameo combinations, it's Smoke and Serena, Reptile and Sector, Liu Kang and Scorpion, General Shao and Goro, and Melina and Scorpion. Don't know why, those are just the combos that mesh the most with the way that I play the game. Comment down below if you have a different opinion for any of those characters, or just what your main combos are for fighters and their cameos. I mean, sure, the game is, like, incredibly unbalanced and buggy at times, but, like, you name 3 games that you've played recently that weren't buggy as fuck on launch. Okay, last few complaints and criticisms before I wrap this up. The cosmetics in this game kind of fucking suck, actually. I didn't love MK11's cosmetic system, but it was miles better than this. I like how they streamlined the menus to just the individual skins and then color palette swaps of them, but the lack of actual skins really hurts the customization, as does the lack of loadouts. I mean, if you have this many skins and recolors of them, then why limit me to only one at a time? And restricting us down to one gear piece, making it basically impossible to have certain massless characters, or change really obvious pieces like Scorpion's Spear or Shao's helmet, is like advanced stupidity. And the way you get these things isn't any better. I like Invasions mode on a conceptual level, but the execution feels really undercooked and amplifies the grindy nature of the previous game. But the individual tasks aren't as fun and the rewards aren't as inherently satisfying. And the microtransactions are somehow more aggressive feeling in this one. I do like some of the cosmetics offered in the seasonal shop, and I know future seasons will offer more unique looks, but overall the Pokemon-esque design of Invasions just isn't for me, and there's really nothing else you can do outside of towers and online play. So from top to bottom, Mortal Kombat 1 reminds me of something I've been feeling with a lot of games recently. Games like this and Sonic Frontiers, for example, and a couple others have felt like half a game. Exquisite core gameplay and a really solid focus on some of the things I love, but undercooked as all hell and missing a lot of core elements that would make the game feel complete. And yeah, I love the combat itself and the reinvention of some of the characters, but ultimately, as a whole, this game just doesn't feel like what I've come to expect from Mortal Kombat. Special thanks to my buddies Omar, Christian, and Devrick for donating to the $10 tier on the Patreon. If you too want to wield the power of an Elder God, then please consider subscribing to me on my Patreon. You can donate for as little as $3 a month. Once the strikes are over, I will go back to reviewing things that are very much being struck right now. And on top of that, there is plenty of bonus content on there, including exclusive companion videos for some of my longer projects, so on and so forth. And of course, I really appreciate it.